Okay, so this is the big one. Hunnsy, fanboy extraordinaire of the mighty Diving for Pearls, was set the task a while back to locate Danny Malone, the main man of the band. Because not only is Hunnsy an absolute dyed-in-the-wool fan of the group, but he also found out that Danny was living in Brighton. Now, this is weird because Danny is not a Brightonian. He's not even English. He's an American. And Hunnsy loved the fact that he'd found him located in Brighton because Hunnsy used to live in Brighton. So blah-de-blah-de-blah. It's the Brighton Mafia. He hunted him down, and we are delighted to say Danny Malone is here. Danny Malone, the king of diving for pearls. Welcome to HoJo and Hunnsy Hard Rock.
Welcome, Danny.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. You're looking far too handsome. The single-digit listener won't know this because they'll only be audio, but I'm looking at Danny. He's far more handsome than me and Hunnsy, that's for sure. So tell us first and foremost, how on earth a man from the East Coast of the United States of America, leader of a band that was firmly entrenched in American music, ends up in Brighton?
I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I did get another record deal after Diving for Pearls.
We do know this.
I got a record deal with Atlantic Records. And again, people think that this is kind of humorous when I tell them the story, but I was in a bit of a supergroup with a guy named Elliot Easton, who'd been in the Cars, who I'd known for many, many years. For about a year, Diving for Pearls was like the biggest band in New York City, which, may sound like a small feat to some people, but it's really not. No. I mean, we played like all the good clubs and packed them, frankly. We used to play the China Club and the Cat Club downtown.
Just to be clear, what year would that be when you would pack?
That would have been like 87, very late 1987.
So prior to you getting the deal with Epic?
Yeah, we were a pretty popular band. Popular to the point where musicians would tell other musicians, you need to see this band. And that would filter through to some fairly famous people, actually.
That was in the 87 period. You're in that sweet spot. Bon Jovi were absolutely enormous at that time.
The whole Poodlehead, it was that thing. And New York City was a pretty hot place to be at the time. But people used to come to see us. And one of the people that used to come to see us regularly was Elliot Easton. Elliot became like a really big fan of the band. And he used to come see us at the China Club all the time. And I'm left-handed. I play guitar left-handed. And at the time, I was still playing guitar in the band. Eventually I put the guitar away and Yul pretty much took care of all the guitar duties. But initially I was still playing guitar. So Elliot started coming up on stage with us because, again, there was another left-handed guitarist, and Elliot, being left-handed, could actually play. So we used to famously end the set, or it was an encore, I suppose, with For Your Love. And Elliot always came up on stage whenever we played the China Club. So I'd been friends with Elliot for a few years after Diving for Pearls fell apart. And then Elliot knows everybody in the world. Elliot was a famous rock star and huge band. So when he and I got a record deal with Atlantic, Elliot started calling in all of his favors from friends. Benmont Tench and Stan Lynch from Tom Petty's band both played on the record. And then Roy Thomas Baker produced it.
That record was never released, though, was it?
Sadly, that was not a particularly good record. It just didn't end up being a good record. The demos, which Elliot and I did alone, just the two of us, most of them were just acoustic demos, was so much better than the actual record itself.
So you're effectively blaming Roy Thomas Baker then?
You wouldn't be the first person, Danny.
No, you wouldn't. I don't think that Roy would have anything good to say about me, if Roy even remembered me.
Did you and Roy not get along then, Danny? Let's put it that way.
No, I got along really, really well with Roy. Roy's not a terribly difficult person to get along with. It's just that we had different philosophies. Roy used to say to me almost on a daily basis, well, we'd be done if we had a proper singer. I just don't think Roy thought much of my ability. He thought very, very highly of Elliot. What is he doing with this guy? This guy's just a loser. We never gelled. We never meshed.
That is weird now, isn't it? Because if there's one thing nobody could dispute was that you've got some pipes on you.
I thought I could sing until I met Roy Thomas Baker.
What does
and
he
then
know?
Roy Thomas Baker just destroyed me. On a daily basis, he destroyed me. Steve Perry came into the studio a few times. I think Roy thought if I spoke to Steve, Steve could give me some advice.
Wow.
But the question was, how did I end up in England? Yeah, well, the point is that my wife happened to be in Los Angeles at the same time. And it was the summer of the Rodney King riots, and we were staying in the same hotel.
That was 91?
That would have been 1992. So, even Elliot would say this, the only good thing that came from that whole part of our lives was that I met my wife.
How did you meet her?
I met her just hanging around. Roy, being English, just heard English accents, and I think introduced himself to my wife. She was with a colleague.
In a bar?
No, it could have easily been in a bar. I'm sure there were drinks involved because Roy never went too long without having a drink. But that was it. We met there, and here we are, 34 years later.
Is she a London girl?
She grew up in North London, yeah.
Are we allowed to name check her? It would seem churlish not to.
Yeah, Sam. Sam's her name.
Okay, so you meet Sam in 92. It's the only thing you'll ever thank Roy Thomas Baker for, but it's quite good. And she decided...
Sorry, was he at the wedding, Danny?
No, no, he never received an invitation to the wedding.
Never mind.
So what was the driving force for you to move to England?
I think we'd done our time in New Jersey. We lived in New Jersey for 11 years, and I'd kind of done my time in the metropolitan New York City area. And I think we were just looking for something completely different. And she was kind of anxious after 30 years of living in America. She was kind of anxious to come home. So
you moved to England
We moved to England 4 years ago.
Just so that I get the chronology right, the project with Elliot Easton would have been about when?
92. We got signed in probably 91. Went out to Los Angeles in spring, summer of 92 to make that record.
After that, I read that you did a little thing with Glenn Burtnick from Styx. Is that right?
I have nothing but glowing things to say about Glenn Burtnick. I'd known Glenn for a long time because of the connection with David Prater, who produced the Diving for Pearls record. I know he produced at least one and maybe two of Glenn's records. Glenn and I had been friends for a long time, and Glenn and I are both Beatle fanatics. So if you know anything about Glenn, you know that Glenn was one of the original cast members in Beatlemania. Another left-handed guy, played Paul McCartney. I mean, I didn't give up until I was 42 years old. I stuck around for a very, very long time.
Wow.
Came close to getting a third record deal, but that never actually happened. I hung around New York for a long time and really continued to try to have a career. And sadly, for any number of reasons, it just didn't work out.
You reunited with David Prater, didn't you? You did another Diving for Pearls album.
Which sadly, nobody seemed to like. David and I were really excited about that. And that was for, what was the name of that label? I've forgotten. Jesus, that's sad.
Tenzia Records, from what mine.
It was a Tenzia. The Diving for Pearls record did exceptionally well in a few places, and one of those places was Sweden. Swedes tend to know more about Diving for Pearls as a band and me as a person than any other population on earth. It did really, really well there. Sadly, we never made it there to play.
Well, everybody I knew who was into AOR loved that record so much, the first album.
And I do know that, Hunnsy. The record got reissued on Rock Candy.
He's our boss.
So Rock Candy, what a great thing that is. And they did a really, really nice job on that reissue.
I've got that reissue. There's a couple of covers on the bonus tracks.
Yeah.
I know we're jumping around a bit, HoJo.
I'm looking forward to editing this one.
On that reissue, there's a cover of Dear Prudence by the Beatles, obviously.
Beatles, yeah.
But this is also a cover of the cult She Sells Sanctuary.
Totally not aware of it.
Which is rather interesting when you read about the fact that Yule did a little gig with Ian Astbury from the Cult.
Oh, Yule and Ian are like really, really close friends and have been for a number of years now. I just had a conversation the other day with Yule about the Cult. He's always in contact with Ian.
This is weird to me. Declared interest, I like the Cult. I know Billy Duffy very well. We grew up about 3 miles from it. If I was making the rock Venn diagram, I would have had Diving for Pearls and the Cults intersecting in any way, shape or form.
Now, the Cult were, without question, certainly Yule and I's favorite band. We were just truly mad about the Cult. I can't tell you how or when Yule met Ian, but he did. Can't say enough good things about the Cult.
Why were you such a big fan of the Cult, given the style of music you were making? Because that's a long way removed from what the Cult do.
Yeah, I don't know. She Sells Sanctuary in the 80s was such an anomaly, really, with all the synth stuff. And I fell in love with that song. And then subsequently fell in love with the band. I mean, I just became a huge fan. There were a bunch of New York City bands, and there was this whole downtown scene where it was much less pop and much harder rock. I was actually in a band called The Warm Jets for a while as a bass player. That was that type of band that was like a cult band.
Wow.
So I was always into that sort of thing, the 80s hard rock thing. And you do that because I shouldn't sell myself short like this, but you do that sort of thing because that's what records companies are signing.
Right.
It's not that your heart isn't completely in it. I loved commercial hard rock bands from the 70s that I listened to as a kid growing up. So it wasn't a huge stretch for me. But Bon Jovi was never my favorite band. That wasn't my thing. We were talking earlier about celebrities coming to see the band in the 80s. And one of the guys that used to come see us all the time was a guy named Rob Halford.
Judas Priest, yeah.
From Judas Priest. And I knew Rob through Yule. Yule had known Rob for years. So that's the kind of thing that the guys in the band were really into. We were into things that are a little bit darker, a little bit heavier, and maybe not quite as commercial.
So was Diving for Pearls just the kind of music that came out of you, that it was almost like you were just a conduit for something? Because if you're interested in all that other stuff, Diving for Pearls is a long way to the left of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I never really thought of it that way. I mean, maybe the single, my least favorite song on the record and the song that people seem to remember, that might have been a little bit of a stretch for me. I mean,
are you talking about Give Me Your Good Loving?
Yeah, I had to fabricate.
And Huntsy, you're so disappointed. You've told me for the last 3 weeks how brilliant that song is.
For me, it's in the top 5 greatest AOR songs ever.
Yeah.
And you've literally slagged it off.
The guy that signed us at Epic was a guy named Michael Kaplan. And this is the classic A&R story. We had most of the record, and we've been playing most of that record for the better part of a year live. And Michael literally came to us and said, listen, it's really, really good. We think we've got a record here, but we're missing a single.
Yeah, the big single.
And I had that idea, which was incomplete at the time. I brought it to rehearsal one night, and I was singing the Any Way You Want It, That's the Way You Get It. That was the chorus for me. And Peter Clemente, the drummer, after we played it for a few hours that night, said, that's not the chorus. It doesn't have a chorus, and it needs a chorus. It's not rocket science. To write a song like that ain't really that hard. The chorus was the easiest part of the song to write. Once I convinced myself that it needed a chorus, that happened fairly quickly. And believe it or not, that was enough for Michael Kaplan. He heard that and he thought, oh my God, we are there. We've reached the promised land. This is it. This is great. And it's not that I wasn't proud of it. I am proud of it, I suppose, on some level, but I didn't think it was my greatest achievement as a songwriter.
The album's full of great songs, though.
Yeah. My favorite song on that record was always, Jesus Christ, I can't even remember the names of these songs anymore.
Do you want me to go through the track listing for you?
You're All I Know, I think is what it's
called.
called.
It's a great song.
I really liked it. Lyrically, I was always very fond and proud of. I think it's just called Don't Cry. I thought it was a good ballad. My wife's favorite song is New Moon.
It's called I Don't Want to Cry.
I don't want to cry.
I love this. I'm telling you what your song's called.
I really don't listen to...
No, I understand that.
If I had to listen to anything, I would listen to the Atenzia record. I think there's some great tracks on that second album that sadly nobody seemed to like.
Well, you know what they say, don't you, Danny?
No, what do they say?
The people have spoken. The bastards.
The people have spoken. I will say this about Diving for Pearls and my whole experience with that band. Great live band. It's unfortunate that most people never got a chance to see us.
No, you never played in England, did you? Did you play in England?
We never
got a chance to see you. So what you do in those instances is you try and go down a bit of a rabbit hole on YouTube and find some scratchy VCR recording from the Ritz in New York.
Yeah.
Just to get a sense of what the band looked like on stage. There's literally nothing. No live footage. There's not even a TV appearance. There's nothing. And it's really heartbreaking.
It does exist. It's out there. I have some. I've just never been able to find the time. First, to have it transferred so that it's digital.
Yeah.
And then uploaded. I've forgotten the name of the television show. We did do one late night television show, but there's maybe a 15-second clip of us actually performing.
It kind of adds to your cult status, I think, the fact that there isn't anything.
I will make every effort to see if I can find it, dig it up, and have it transferred, and then I'll send it to you guys.
That would be amazing.
Danny, let me ask you, when the first album was finished, what were your honest thoughts about it? Second thing, why didn't it happen? And third thing, what did that mean for you? Obviously, you ended up in the band with Elliot, but presumably Diving for Pearls split because you just went, there's no future in it.
Yeah. I had really high hopes for that record when we finished it. It was recorded in Nashville. I think we all left Nashville and felt really, really good about it. I think the people at Epic felt really good about it. There was every reason to believe that the band could do well. Back then, your first single didn't really fly out the door. They spent a lot of money on a video. We made that video. I don't think it looks like a high budget video in a lot of ways, but it was a really high budget video. I mean, they spent a couple $100,000, which back in 1989 was an enormous amount of money. And it did really, really well in some places. And that's where they sent us to play. And we worked our asses off, frankly. We played a lot of one night shows. And then it came time for a second single, and you needed a second video. And because I don't think they got the response that they wanted on the first one, it's maybe $250,000 investment for a second video, which if you didn't have a video back, MTV still ruled. If you weren't getting played on MTV, radio could help, but you needed both, frankly. Powers that be, a guy named Don Grierson, who is the senior vice president of Epic Records, I think at the time, or maybe even the president, just decided that they weren't gonna spend the money on the second video. And then the whole thing just started to fall apart very, very quickly after that. I don't mind telling you, they picked up our option. When you sign a record deal, or when you signed a record deal back in the 80s, you signed like a 6-record deal. Yeah. They had you locked up for 6 records. So they picked up our second option, and we started rehearsing. We even did demos with David Prater, 4 or 5 songs. So they hadn't given up on us. I think they'd just given up on that record. But now it's like 1991. And then it wasn't long after that Nirvana came along. And believe it or not, Diving for Pearls was managed by the same people that managed Nirvana. Goldmine Entertainment, who managed me for years and had been managing Nirvana for a very, very long time. The bottom fell out of that whole thing. It wasn't just us. We're not the only casualties of all of that. Bands like Warrant and Winger and all kinds of bands basically disappeared after that.
Grunge came in and just wiped out hundreds of bands.
It really did, man. And it was really, really disheartening for somebody like me, because it becomes really, really difficult to change horses in the middle of a street. It's hard to go from being a poodlehead to a convincing, believable grunt, and that just was never me anyway. I tried something completely different after that. By the mid-90s, I was much more into the Britpop thing than I was into the grunge thing. That was that whole project with Glenn. Glenn and I stayed involved for many, many years and wrote songs together, and most of those were Beatle-influenced pop songs.
And what was that project called?
Again, never got signed, never released, but it was called The Dunaways. It was total power pop. I was lucky enough. I did manage to get another publishing deal. A guy named John Tita, who sadly just died, signed me to Warner Chappell. I think John really, really believed in me at the time. By this time, I'm 35, 36 years old. So it's a tough sell. But John really did believe in me, and he tried desperately to get that band, the Dunaways, a record deal, and that just never happened. So.
Okay, so I think chronologically we managed to square the circle a little bit. You mentioned that there came a point when you went, I'm done.
Yeah.
What year was that?
Well, I wasn't officially done until about 99. I just decided to be a guitar player. So I was a guitar player in a guy named John Eddy's band, who had a bit of a hit in the 80s with a song called Jungle Boy. John had a deal with CBS, I believe, Columbia. So I hung around until then, but it wasn't long after the failure. The Dunaways thing didn't work out, and I think after that, I kind of realized that would have been 95, 96. You get tired of beating your head against the wall.
And in many ways, it's interesting to talk to somebody who's been through that experience, because everybody tries to put the shoe shine on. Everybody tries to tell you, no, it was always all great and this and that.
Yeah.
And the music business is a tough motherfucking place to be.
Oh, it's fucking brutal. It can be soul destroying.
Yes, because your music is so personal to you.
Yeah, exactly.
If you care about what you're doing and you spend a lifetime being rejected for it, that can have a very negative effect on your mental.
It can. I'm lucky. I'm pretty resilient. I never worry too much about myself. I always manage to find a way and always manage to stay upbeat and happy. So
what did you do when you went, I'm done? What did you do to earn a living?
I got into the guitar business, which was seamless for me. The retail end of it, the vintage guitar business for many, and I still dabble in it. I got into the vintage guitar thing at a time when it was fairly lucrative. Guitars are my passion. They always had been. That was a very easy transition for me.
Okay, so you went into the vintage guitar business. Did you open a shop?
Yeah, I did. I had a shop. It's still there. It's on 23rd Street in the Chelsea Hotel. It's called Chelsea Guitars. It used to be called Dan's Chelsea Guitars, but now it's just Chelsea Guitars. It was the first time that I moved to New York. My wife got a great job offer here, and it was just time to try something else, and we did that.
Sorry, I got confused. Your wife got a great job offer to go to Brighton or to go to New York?
To come to London. That was the first time that we moved here back in 99.
What do you do now to earn a living, Danny?
I don't do anything. My wife has done very, very well, and I've done okay. At the ripe old age of 67, I no longer do anything.
You're not 67.
Yeah, I'm 67 years old.
You can't look that fucking good and be 67.
I was old. I've been at it for a very, very long time. When Diving for Pearls got its deal, I was 31 years old.
I think the fact that you got out of the music business when you did has served you very well, because all those people are still flogging their sorry asses around the circuit. They don't look anything like as good as you.
Look, I still dream about being on stage. I'd still love nothing more than to be able to do it. I get offers. Somebody says, please make another Diving for Pearls record. And I say, I don't know if the world really needs another Diving for Pearls record.
I would love a new Diving for Pearls record. Of course I would, but only with the original lineup. HoJo got particularly excited. We talked about the album on the pod.
Yeah.
And he talked about Yule, about how he ended up A, in Seinfeld, and B, playing guitar with Ian Astbury from The Cult.
It was some sort of theater show, yeah.
How did that all happen?
Yule is an enormously funny guy. He's a born comedian. He's very, very funny, and he's a great guitar player and an extraordinary entertainer. And I think he was always interested in acting. When Diving for Pearls fell apart, we were all in our early 30s. And Yule had already had another band that lost a deal. He'd been in this band, Urgent. So he'd already had and lost 2 deals. And I think Yule was just fed up. And frankly, I don't mind telling you, I was deeply, deeply hurt and deeply disappointed, because we still had a deal with Epic when he left the band. I mean, they'd picked up our option.
Did he leave because he'd got the gig in Seinfeld?
No, he left just to go to acting school.
Oh, wow.
I want to say it was like the Bill Esper School or something in New York City. But Yule had decided that he'd had enough and that he wanted to try acting. He left the band, enrolled himself in acting school, and then got very, very lucky early in his career. He got cast in a major motion picture called The Mambo Kings, I think it was called.
Right.
It was a small part, but it was sizable enough. Initially in his career, he got cast as a Hispanic. And I don't know much about how or when he got the Seinfeld gig, but I mean, I just remember it being a very, very big deal at the time because it's a memorable character.
Yeah. He features quite a lot in the episode around the Soup Nazi.
The myth and the lore around the Soup Nazis, that certainly didn't hurt his career. But again, very, very funny guy, incredibly personable. It's hard not to like Yule. So if you meet him.
Are you still in touch with him?
Oh, God, constantly.
So you got over your upset about the fact that he quit the band to go to acting school?
And Yule, I think, would agree. It took a number of years, but eventually, yeah. And I think we're probably better friends now than we've ever been. And I'm glad to be able to say that I'm very, very good friends with Yule. I'm very, very good friends with the drummer, Peter Clementi. And I'm very, very good friends with the keyboard player, who I'd always been good. The keyboard player in Diving for Pearls, Jack, the guy that I wrote most of those songs with, he and I are both from Boston. And we played in bands before Diving for Pearls.
Are you still good friends with David Weeks, the bass player?
No, I don't think David would disagree with me. David and I were never particularly close. David was the 3rd or 4th bass player in Diving for Pearls. I was telling my wife the other day, we were listening to the radio and Billy Idol song came on, and I was sitting here having dinner with my daughter. And I said to her, I opened for Billy Idol once. And my daughter was like, you never told me that. I said, yeah, I was back in Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, back in the early 80s. This band that I was in opened up for Billy Idol. His bass player was a guy named Phil Feit. And Phil Feit was the very first bass player in Diving for Pearls. But we went through like 4 bass players. And David was the last one. David and I just never got along, sadly. He did tour with a woman named Alanis Miles after he left, who had that hit.
Alana Miles. Black Velvet, wasn't it?
That's it, Hunnsy. Yeah, it was Black Velvet. So he toured with her for a while, and then he very quickly got out of it. She was managed by Gold Mountain as well. He moved to Los Angeles. I knew his girlfriend, whose father owned that law firm, which is the law firm in that film, Erin Brockovich. It's a pretty extraordinary story where David ended up.
He ended up representing Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee.
I know he did. I know, it's an extraordinary story. I mean, you can't make that shit up. It's a pretty extraordinary story. He's a nice guy. I have spoken to him once or twice, but very little contact whatsoever.
Let me ask you this, Danny. You are clearly a well-adjusted fella. The fact that Diving for Pearls only became what you might call a connoisseur's choice has not been the ruin of you. So,
I like that. Can I use that?
Yes, you can. I'll give it you for free. So that's a good thing. How does it feel when you have people popping up out the woodwork like Hunnsy going, oh my God, Diving for Pearls? That's the apotheosis of everything I love about AOR. Does it feel like you're still attached to that record and that era, or does that feel like another person, another lifetime?
That is a fantastic question. I can't say that I feel all that. I feel very, very connected to the city of New York and that whole era. It really was an extraordinary time. It was before Rudy Giuliani cleaned up the city. Anybody that lived in New York City in the 80s, they're familiar with that story. New York City was still dirty and grungy. And there was this place called the Music Building where everybody rehearsed on 8th Avenue and 38th Street. So I still feel very, very connected to the city of New York and that whole scene, the music scene that did in fact exist. It was real in New York City during that time. But I can't say that I feel deeply connected to the genre or frankly even to the band. Look, I'm very, very proud of it. We all talk about the best times of our lives, and and it was an extraordinary time. But musically, I feel like I've changed so much, and the things that I like now are so vastly different than that kind of music. Can't say I feel a deep, deep connection.
Nor should you feel obliged to if you don't.
It was in fact 35 years ago, I believe.
What do your children think of that first Diving for Pearls album?
I think that they both find it hard to believe that that's me.
Yeah.
How old are your kids, Danny?
I have 2 daughters, a 25-year-old and a 22-year-old.
I've got 2 around about the same age as yours. They're not remotely interested in hard rock.
My oldest daughter, all she listens to really is hip hop and rap.
Sounds like mine.
And my youngest is really kind of into maybe a little bit more ambient, a little bit darker EDM kind of thing.
Right. So what are the things that you listen to now? Say today, what would you listen to that's really making you go, wow, that's amazing?
My obsession with the Beatles is lifelong. I will never, ever stop listening to the Beatles and thinking to myself, oh my God, that's just extraordinary. I like a guy named Ryan Adams a lot.
Not Brian, Ryan.
Not Brian, although I like Brian as well. Don't misunderstand me. I like Brian a lot.
I'm a bit of a Ryan Adams fanboy as well.
I'm obsessed by him. I just love his attitude. I love his sensibility. I love the fact that he takes risk. I love the fact that he's a rocker at heart, really.
He's a proper metaler.
That's his thing. I really like Ryan Adams. I listen to a lot of radio. Sabrina Carpenter. I love jazz now. I never loved jazz. I have a friend, a very, very, very good friend that sat me down and said, no, you have to listen to this.
I was having this conversation yesterday morning with my wife. Something happens to you when you reach a certain age. Oh, jazz.
Where have you been all my life? I vividly remember the 70s when Mahavishnu Orchestra happened. And I was a bit of a prog head. I did like prog. Yes may have been one of my favorite bands in the 70s. But the idea of fusion was just too much of a stretch for me. And people would say to me, you got to listen to the Jeff Beck Group, and you got to listen to Blow by Blow, and you got to listen to Mahavishnu Orchestra. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my God, it's like being on Mars, man. I cannot wrap my head around any of this. And I love Mahavishnu now. My wife says, what in the name of God is that? It's just a racket to her. So yeah, I love music. I will never, ever stop listening to music. On my deathbed, I'll have a playlist.
On Hunssy's deathbed, it'll be the first Diving for Pearls album.
Honestly, though, I just want to say this with all sincerity. I do love the fact that people still discover that record and still find something good about it. It does make me very happy.
Well, you've made your mark, haven't you? You have made your mark in a small way, because there are a lot of people in this world who are, like Hunnsy, obsessed with that record.
There's a lot of people who listen to our pod who love that record. They constantly post that video for Give Me a Good Lovin', and they constantly talk about that record. So when we announced that we've done this interview, I fully expect the internet to explode from an AOR perspective, because you don't really do many interviews about Diving for Pearls, do you?
No, the simple answer to the question is no, I don't.
We're going to wrap it up here because Hunssy's going to go to meltdown. He's just going to start nibbling about how much he loves that record. But Danny, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. We're very delighted that you decided to adopt our country of birth as your country to spend your frankly too good-looking 60s in. My suggestion is we've got to try and get together at some point, the 3 of us in a pub somewhere. You and I can talk about jazz.
Danny, what this means is your love of the cult and the fact that you and HoJo have gotten so much. HoJo might actually turn around and say, you know what, I love that first Diving for Pearls album now.
Let's wait and see.
I won't hold my breath.